Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 263. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Hanna Verrall about a new book that she and 31 other people have written, a book which she calls slightly weird, but in the best way. It's titled The Fax Club Experiment. A total of 100 people were invited to participate in a year-long experiment in which they would receive a writing prompt, a question of some sort, every Friday. The question would be sent to them via fax machine. They had 1 week to consider, write, and submit their answer. Only 32 people made it to the end of the year-long experiment, and they decided to compile an assortment of their responses to each of the questions into a book. The Fax Club Experiment is a collection of these authors' favorite responses to each of the questions, and Hanna is here to share with us how it all came to pass. In this episode, I'll chat with Hanna about her writing journey, why each author remained anonymous throughout the experiment, and what surprised her about her and her fellow authors' answers to the questions posed each week, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Hanna Verrall, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Great to be here, Stacey. Thanks for having me on.
I thought what we could do today is talk about a brand new book of which you are one of 32 co-authors. Can you introduce us to the Fax Club Experiment?
Sure. It's actually the brainchild of someone who isn't one of the 32 authors, a guy called David Hyatt. He runs the Do Lectures, which is a fabulous ideas festival here in West Wales, which is how I got to know him. And he had this bright idea that he would create a club that was hard to get into, hard to stay in, but would help us all become more creative and think differently. And one day an email landed in my inbox with an invitation to join the Fax Club. I do like a little bit of an adventure, a little bit of mysteriousness and something that's a bit weird and wacky. So I jumped at the chance. And that turned out to be an experiment of a whole year. Every week we'd receive a question by fax, hence the Fax Club, that we had a week to answer. And then at the end, we looked at all of our answers and collated some of our favourites into the book, The Fax Club Experiment. So there are 32 co-authors, but originally there were meant to be 100. Only 32 made it all the way to the end.
Really? So was there ever a point when you thought, oh, this is enough? Maybe I just stop.
Frequently. Sometimes there are questions that were really hard to answer. Sometimes life was lifing, and sometimes I didn't answer. But I did make it to the end. And one day in February last year, we all met for the first time. One of the things I didn't tell you is those 100 people, we were given numbers, so we had no clue who each other were. We didn't have names, we didn't have pictures, just our words. So that day in February, was the first time we actually got to see our fellow authors. And some of them I actually knew in real life separately. And others, it was the first time I'd met them at all.
Really?
So it was a brilliant day.
So the ones you knew, you didn't know they were part of the club.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
There's one I suspected might be in there, but others, no, I had no idea that they were a member of the club.
Really? So first of all, you get this email and it says, "Hey, do you want to join?" And the first thing you have to do is buy a fax machine. So first of all, how easy or difficult was it to go and source a working fax machine and get all set up?
So different people had different experiences. Some had them in the attic already. I know of one of my authors who borrowed it from an elderly neighbour. Others were scouring eBay. I work in tech, so I cheated. And I used an eFax service because I know that my line here, my telephone line, does not support fax service. So I knew I would never be able to get an actual fax machine. So I went straight for the alternative. But almost everyone did get a fax machine, and there were lots of messages backwards and forwards. We had an online forum where we actually posted our answers. Lots of messages backwards and forwards asking for help testing whether their fax machine worked, or what was this week's fax because it hadn't come through, or the cat had eaten it, or whatever. There was quite a lot of fun and engagement simply around the fax aspect of it and getting that to work. It was brilliant.
Right. Because that's, yes, it's not something people are in contact with today. I mean, it used to be everywhere. Everyone had it. You did it all the time, but it's just gone today. So I imagine there is some excitement about hearing the noise and receiving the fax and getting the question every week. A little fanfare, if you will.
Absolutely. The churn of the fax machine in the background. There was a story of one person's cat used to avidly watch it at 5 p.m. on a Friday, waiting for the magic paper to come out and enjoying that. Other people with kids wondering what on earth this weird device was in the corner. All sorts of tales. Yeah.
Right. And so you start with 100. By the end, you're down to 32. Did you get a sense of the reasons why people dropped off? Like you said, there were reasons you thought of dropping off, but did you get a sense of it just became too much, life gets in the way, people just stopped being interested in it, it wasn't for them? Any idea why you ended up with only 32?
So, as I said, we were all anonymous. We do know 5 of the missing 68, because some actually came for that day but then decided creating the book would be too much work, and they bowed out at that point. And I happened to be at a training course earlier this year run by David, who had the idea in the first place, and 2 people I knew there quietly admitted that they'd been in and then dropped out, but I don't know their reasons. So for the majority, for 65 people, none of us have any idea why they dropped out, whether it was life, whether they didn't like the questions, whether it just didn't suit them to write on a weekly cadence, or whether they just forgot. Because there is something about getting into the rhythm and the routine of it, right, where unless you are in that rhythm, it's really easy for it to slip out of your mind, and then you've missed your chance.
Yeah. And it's a commitment. I mean, that is a commitment. Maybe at the beginning you're like, oh, that's not a big deal. A question a week. That's easy. But I imagine that, like you said, there is something about the routine that makes it easy to keep going. Also hard at the same time to keep that up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And some of the questions were particularly challenging and thought-provoking, and were really quite hard to answer within a week. Others you could answer quite quickly off the top of your head, but a lot of them took some careful thought. So it was very easy to get the facts, read it, think of an answer, but know that you wanted to think more about it. And then suddenly for the week to have whistled past and you're frantically at 4 p.m. on a Friday trying to write your answer to last week's before next week's
Right.
lands. Um,
Well,
yeah,
let's
some people really enjoyed that discipline,
yeah.
though. Some
Well,
some people actually chose to join because of that discipline of writing every week.
hmm. Were the people that you've met, the people that you know of that were part of this, were they writers? Are you a writer? Were they all writers? Is this something that they did and they enjoyed, or was this something that took a lot of people outside their comfort zone?
It really varies, as you can imagine, with 100 different people,
Mm-hmm.
but more towards they're not writers, we're not writers, this is something outside of our comfort zone, perhaps something that we want to do more and get better at. Perhaps it's just something that is very different to their day job. I work in tech. I write technical, dry stuff brilliantly. Things that are more emotional and engaging. Maybe at school I did, but these days I've almost trained myself out of it. So that was an important part for me to sort of give myself the opportunity to explore writing in a really different style to what I would do normally.
Right. Well, let's talk about some of the questions because, as you mentioned, some of them are very easy to answer and some were more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk us through some samples of questions that you received? And then I'd like to then talk about some of your favorites, ones that you really enjoyed for whatever reason and ones you did not.
Okay. Um, I have the book here in front of me with the table of contents with all of our questions. Shall we just pick a number,
Yeah.
1 to 52, and we'll go for that one?
Okay. 14.
14, page 51. So this is the chapter is called Tiny Pieces of Grit. And the question is, I'm really glad because you chose quite a short one. Some of them are much longer, but this one's quite short. I push the door shut, but it won't close. So this time I push a little harder. It still won't shut. This time I give it all of my effort. It still won't shut. I look down at the floor and there is a tiny piece of grit. I sweep away the grit and gently close the door shut. What little thing in your life or business, if removed, would change everything?
Mm, my goodness. So were the questions similar to this, where it really made you stop and think about something very personal to you?
Often they were very deeply personal. There's a question about writing a letter to the person who has changed your life the most and expressing gratitude to them. So some of them were thought experiments where, like that one, what would change? What would you do to change things? Some were practical experiments. We were asked to go next time that we went into a coffee shop to ask for 10% discount and see how it felt. So sometimes it was actually stepping into action and putting ourselves in perhaps slightly unusual situations. And not all of us are British. Most of us were, but we've got colleagues from across Europe and from the States as well. So we each have our own cultural references. But that's actually a really uncomfortable position for a very reserved British person to do, to ask for a discount. So it was tough.
Mm. Of the 52 questions that you received, were there any that stood out for you as really easy to answer? Like you had an answer for that as soon as you read it.
Quite a few.
Hmm.
So question 30 is about the book that will change your life is the one that you write. What's your book title? And that one I had loads of ideas for, and the problem was actually to choose one, not all of them. So
Right.
different sorts of challenges.
Yeah.
But that most of those Having a quick look at that page, most of the answers there are sort of half a dozen words, maybe eight. So it really quick to answer
Right. Once
in
you
terms
had
of the
the
writing
answer.
time.
Right.
Absolutely. Whereas others, we've got ones with 3 pages long answers.
Mm. Because I was going to ask you, like, what was the expected length for the answer? So it sounds like the length of the answer was directly tied to the nature of the question. And there was no expectation. You didn't have to write 50 words or 500 words or
People were writing very, very long answers. And because it was an experiment, there had been no ground rules. And David and the Do team suggested that perhaps we ought to keep our answers to 200 words.
mm,
And I think most people looking at the answers in the book, um, most are around half to 2/3 of a page, but there are some that are 2, 3 pages long easily.
mm.
So it really varied. It depended on your answer and your perspective, as much as on the question, because even those with very long answers, some answers are still very short
Still very
in the
short.
mix. So
Were there any questions that you didn't like, either because they were hard for you to find an answer to it, or you had an answer, but you didn't like it?
I think the hardest one for me to answer was question 43, which was to spend a week in the more in the online presence, but in the company of people who hold the complete opposite perspective to you. And that I think was
Mm,
very, very uncomfortable for a lot of people to spend time with people who think completely the opposite. I think that was one of my conscientious, I can't say it, my conscientious objector questions. I declined to answer that because I didn't really want to spend time with those types of people. I value my own sense of self-worth too
yeah.
much. But there were some really interesting answers. So one of the, I think, male authors uh, went and spent a lot of time in tradwife forums. Not something that he would normally do,
Interesting. Okay. So you had the freedom to
especially as a man.
choose how you did it, as well as your answer to whatever the particular question was.
Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah.
were there some surprising, for some of those questions where it required you to do something or think about something or whatever, were there some surprising questions as to how people interpreted those questions that maybe say were different from yours?
Absolutely. One of the things that we were encouraged to do was to engage our counterintuitive side. So we were deliberately being provoked to take the question in a counterintuitive way. So if you ever get a copy of the book, I know Claire was keen to send you one.
Hmm.
Um, it's a book that you dip in and you can read it cover to cover, but actually it's really good for just dipping in and out of when you've got a problem that you're mulling over and you need a sort of fresh perspective of, um, because you'll get 4, 5, however many answers there are for a question, but they will be wildly different. So you can easily see all sorts of different ways of looking at the same question.
Right,
It's
right.
one of the things I like most about the book.
Yeah. I imagine there were probably a few times where you were like, "Oh, I remember my answer to this question." Read somebody else's, you're like, "I would never have thought of it that way."
Absolutely. All frequently, almost every question, and probably 2 or 3 times with every question. It's great.
I did want to ask, when you were writing your answers, did you ever, were you ever either one surprised by your answer once you actually started writing it and really getting into sort of the depth of what you felt on the topic, or did you change your mind at all as you were writing?
So sometimes I would write it early in the week and let it sit, and then make a few edits just before I hit publish. Other times there were three or four or more iterations, sometimes on completely different answers, as I thought more and more about the question and realized that my first answer was not necessarily properly superficial, but not as deep and as thought through as later answers. I really appreciated having a whole week to answer.
Yeah.
It made me think more deeply and write. Not necessarily better in academic terms, but more from the heart.
Right. Right. It's a little reminiscent of, say, writing. I don't. A memoir is not really the right term, but something very deeply personal, which is a hard thing to do.
Absolutely. It's almost a form of journaling, but with prompts from someone else. So it's not just whatever's coming up for you in the moment. You have some direction, um, and some goal towards your writing,
Right. Right.
rather than that author's favourite thing being faced with a blank page and
Right.
having to fill it. So
Right.
it did make it slightly easier sometimes, um, but other times it, some of the questions were deliberately quite uncomfortable,
Mm.
and sometimes we need to be pushed that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very good point. So, how did you go about compiling these answers into the book?
So we decided that because we didn't know the other 68 people, that we had no way of contacting them. Maybe the do lectures did, but we did not directly. So we didn't have the opportunity to ask those people to make sure that they were happy that we used them. So we made the decision to only use the answers from the 32 who was still there at the end, plus the three people. We've got a smattering of answers from the three people who made it to the end, but then realised they hadn't got the capacity to commit to getting the book out of the door. So we've got one or two answers from them, each from them. But yeah, we have only chosen answers from people we absolutely knew were one of the authors or would give us permission to publish their answers.
Did you just vote like for question 32? Did you take the preponderance of?
We thought about that. There are various ways that we could have done it. In the end, what we did was pair everyone up into teams, two, and give everyone three or four questions, and that pair chose their favourite answers for that question. Um, Doing that meant that there was a little bit of a skew towards some of our stronger writers. So when we were short on some answers, that they were very short answers and therefore barely filled half a page, we looked deliberately at some of the authors who had less representation and tried to bring them up as well, so that we were fair and egalitarian, but also prioritizing the best writing and the most thoughtful and
Right.
thought-provoking answers.
And that seems like a fair and actually efficient way to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
it was very effective.
were there any of your answers that got chosen that you're like, oh my gosh, really, that's the one you chose?
No, not really. I should say that although we are named as authors, the answers are published under our number, and only our fellow authors know whose number is whose. And mostly we have deliberately forgotten that as well. We've got a reference, we could go look it up, but mostly we're human to human, and our numbers are almost an alter ego. So no, I didn't really feel, why did you choose that answer? I think I'm proud of all of the answers that went in. And I don't feel, why didn't you choose
Mm.
that answer for the ones that weren't chosen? It's a very strange community of authors. We're very collegiate, both in how we operate now and how we pulled the book together. So we don't really have that sort of egotistical, that answer was brilliant, it should be in. Why hasn't it gone in? Or, oh my God, why did you put that in? It's all been very, very chilled and very relaxed about that type of thing. Everyone has taken care of everyone else and made sure that everyone had good representation in the book and was looked after. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, this idea of being identified by a number, basically writing anonymously. I mean, there's a way to track you, but you're in effect writing anonymously. I imagine there is a great deal of freedom in that, freedom to be honest and unapologetic. Did you find that? Were there any regrets or fears as you were writing something and sending it out? Like, oof, maybe I shouldn't have included that. I imagine that freedom kind of cuts both ways.
Probably does. I very much felt the freedom of being able to write anything that I wanted, um, stepping into my alter ego of my number, and being much, much more honest and vulnerable. On the day when we met, I was quite surprised that it was around 2/3 women to 1/3 men, which I hadn't expected from the answers I was getting. So I feel that that vulnerability and that openness has allowed a lot of us women in that group to take our space, really.
Interesting. I can see how that would have been a pleasant surprise to learn that it had that effect for many writers, many women in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very not surreal, but slightly surreal realization when I looked around and realized how many female faces there were, particularly when you had read the answers, and a lot of them feel a little bit masculine, quite strong energy, and I thought that was really interesting as well. It wasn't just that we had more freedom to have our own voices, but when you don't know the gender or the sex of the author, how you interpret it yourself as well. So
Right, right. Oh, that's a very good point.
speaks to my own bias, doesn't it?
Well, it's interesting. It is, I imagine it was a very interesting experiment, as you say, both as a writer and as a reader.
We were a Amazon bestseller, both sides of the pond in different categories, which is quite interesting.
Really?
Yeah,
What were the categories? Do you remember?
I can't. I might be able. I'll check it out and drop you an email with
Okay.
them. One was something like creative thinking. They were mostly slightly businessy, slightly self-helpy um, categories, but yeah, they were in different categories on either side of the
Interesting.
Atlantic. So
Interesting to see
yeah,
the different approach or understanding as to what this was.
yeah, yeah. It is a slightly weird book in a great way.
I love that. That should be the tagline: a slightly weird book in a great way.
Crazy idea. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, is
Uh-huh.
what we've got on the front. But yeah,
That one
that's
works too.
same type of.
Where do you all go now? You have compiled this in a book, and I imagine you are now in the process of trying to share it with people. Where do you go
Mhm.
from here? Is writing something you will continue to do?
It's interesting. So we're in a phase of actively trying to figure out what we, the 32 authors, would like to do next, what projects we want to take on. Um, I know you mentioned that this broadcast will probably go live on March the 4th. There is a second, so the day we all met in February, David, who organised it, was so excited about the energy that we brought into that room that he instantly went out and ran the experiment again. And that group are finishing and will meet for the first time on the Friday so this coming Friday when this goes out.
Right.
So shortly there'll be another book, we hope, with all of their answers and experiences. And I understand it's a slightly different set of questions. So not just will we have different people writing and answering, but they'll be answering different questions as well.
Mm.
So we're trying to the first 32 are trying to figure out what we want to do. Personally, I'd love to run some more of these experiments. I work with people who make change happen within organizations, and a lot of the questions in the original book were aimed at founders who are able to set the direction of their own organization. But I work with people who can change little bits, but they can't change the whole picture. And I'd love to run an experiment for them. But I'm also really interested in running some for younger people and for children. So 16 to 24-year-olds and perhaps under 16s as well, because the questions don't just challenge you to describe how you think, what your current position is on a topic. It actually changes how you think about that topic. So I really would love to see other people, especially people like I've got a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old, two godsons. I'd love them to have that sort of experience and to have their horizons and their minds broadened by it.
Right.
So
right.
that's
Yeah.
something personal for me. We're looking at all sorts of different things that we might do. We've got a few book clubs that are running with our book, and we've got a kit for that. So that's interesting as well. For book clubs, we've got some readers who want to run their own experiments. We've got a fan in New Zealand who wants to run an experiment over there. So who knows? Watch this space.
Interesting. Good. Okay. Well, to that end, if people want to learn more about the Fax Club experiment, the original, the second iteration,
Mm-hmm.
book club possibilities, possibilities for running, ideas for running their own, all that good stuff. Where can they go to find that information?
We are at, and this is a long name, but very simple to remember, thefaxclubexperiment.com. And you can go there, and there's a lovely newsletter that one of our authors edits and sends out with some questions, so you get a little mini experience. There's a link to find the book, and anything that we do in the future is likely to be there. The book club kit is downloadable from our website as well.
Good.
So that's already up there, ready for anyone who wants it.
Good. And if people want to purchase a copy of the book, best places to go to buy it?
It's now should be available in all your favorite local bookstores, but you might have to order it. It's a little bit of an arcane title. And of course, it's available online as well with some of our biggest known organizations. It's available as ebook, but print is always nicer, isn't it?
Right. So check out all the usual suspects as far as booksellers.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And please do ask your local library to stock it. That would be great, because once your library has it, then other people will get to see it as well.
Right. Very good idea.
Actually, there is one thing that I could mention. We have some books, some copies that are called traveling books, and they are deliberately designed so that we've given around 40, 50 copies out. They've got a book plate in the back. I know that there isn't a video with this podcast, unfortunately, so no one else can see this, but there's a book plate in the back with a unique number on it and space for everyone to write their name, their location, and maybe a short message and a URL, a QR code, so that you can let us know as well. And we would like you to read it, enjoy it, pass it on. We'd love to see how far some of those copies go. So you never know, there might be one floating around in your neighborhood already.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, people should definitely check it out. All the various possibilities for experiencing the Fax Club Experiment. And Hannah, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you and your other 31 fellow authors the best of luck with the book. And congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far. And best of luck with the rest of your individual and collective writing journeys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.